Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 1450. This is a 10th episode show, and that means we're going to talk about something of general interest with our guest today. But first, I got a couple of financial things, maybe only one, maybe two, to talk with you about during the intro portion of today's episode. But I think you'll really enjoy this guest. She is a very successful and well-spoken lady and a coronavirus survivor. So we are going to hear firsthand from her experience, and I think you'll enjoy this episode and get a lot out of it. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. But first, I want to tell you that clearly the folks at Housing Wire are listening to my podcast, because today they just came out with an article that says, will COVID-19 spur a migration from dense cities? Well, hey, haven't I been saying that for 2 months, people? Yes, I have. I've been saying it for at least 2 months, maybe even a little longer than that. I don't know, maybe not. But I don't know. Time passes too quickly. Maybe it's longer than 2 months. I don't know. But at least 2 months I've been saying this. And now the lamestream media is catching on. So you're going to see stories like this all over the place in the news. And it's what I saw when I saw what happened in China and then in Italy. That's what really, really made me realize it's density. Density is the problem, and suburbia is the opportunity. And again, America being very different from other countries around the world, that suburbia is a uniquely American idea. Okay? Remember, that's the post-World War II baby boomers that created suburbia. Then later it was amplified by what? Hopefully you know what this is, Levittown, where the Levitt Company, I don't know if that's the exact name of the developer, but whatever. Anyway, the Levitts, they built these suburban cookie-cutter housing developments in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey, in New York, and a bunch of places all over after that. This grew to be the big trend where these homes could be built really fast, and they had, 27 components of a home, and they just had crews go in and build them quickly, and they made nice little neighborhoods that were little master plan communities with cul-de-sacs and, the typical thing that we understand to be suburbia today. But that had to come from somewhere, because for pretty much all of civilized history before that, it was really either you lived in the city or you lived in the country. And, never the twain shall meet, right? Now, there was this new idea, this new American idea, suburbia. And a lot of that came out of America's love affair with the automobile. And the flagship city of the world that has had a very sad story. And you know what I'm going to say? Good old Detroit, Motown, okay? Really one of the flagship cities of the entire world during the heyday of the auto industry. And of course, it's the poster child for big government liberal disaster, because that's what ruined Detroit. The labor unions got too powerful, and the politicians got too greedy. They had this model cities program, and the whole thing was just a big disaster, right? And, now you know what Detroit is today, right? It's not good. So you have suburbia, and suburbia was made possible by the automobile. And Americans had a love affair with the automobile, unlike really any other country. It was really a uniquely American thing, for better or worse, okay? For better or worse. But this suburbia is now the money-making real estate investing opportunity for you. And again, it's two opposing forces, like I've taught you over the years about the inflation-deflation debate, the opposing forces being technology and globalization versus the inflationary forces of bad government, bad fiscal policy, bad monetary policy, right? That's inflationary, technology, globalization, deflationary. Well, now we see a move away from globalization. Of course, technology will move forward and proceed. And we see more nationalization. We're going to see stronger country borders. Imagine that. Trump vilified and hated by the lamestream media and low information voters. Oh my God, you can't control the border between the U.S. and Mexico. That's evil. Oh, grow up. Okay? Countries have borders, and countries have a right to control their borders. If anyone thinks otherwise, just tell them to jump in a deep lake, because they're just clueless. That's just stupid, okay? Only dumb people think countries don't deserve to control their borders. Pretty much every country on earth does that, and the United States has a right to do it just like everybody else. So calm down, relax, okay? It's normal behavior. But when the U.S. does it, it's evil. Oh, my God. Oh, gosh, ridiculous. Ask Mexico about the way they control their southern border with Guatemala. It's like a military outpost. You're not coming over that border from Guatemala to Mexico. Okay, good luck with that. See if you can cross the Berlin Wall. Okay, but when the U.S. expects to have a border so Mexico can't export their poverty problem because of their corrupt government, it's another matter. So whatever. But you're going to see supply chains diversified, and Mexico, by the way, is going to be the beneficiary of that to a large extent. So we'll see Mexico getting a lot of the benefit from China's loss. And all the thoughts everybody had about China's going to take over, become the superpower, the U.S. is falling. Don't bet on it. That's a stupid bet for a sucker. That's a sucker's bet. The U.S. is not going to lose that game. And anybody who bets against the U.S. is just crazy. It's a bad bet. And listen, I'm no big U.S. proponent. I have all sorts of criticisms of my country, and you've heard them if you listen to this show regularly, but you just don't bet against 18 aircraft carriers, okay? That's just not a good bet. All right, so this article, hey, tangent alert, by the way, that was a tangent, quite a tangent there, Jason. Okay, so Realtors and Demographers say this acceleration of a trend is already taking place. Remember, this migration trend was not a new thing that was caused by COVID-19. This was happening before. Years ago, I was telling you about this. And then years ago, after I started talking about it, I had Meredith Whitney on, and she's the author of The State of the States, a great book, although now maybe a little bit outdated, obviously. But the concept is the same. The migration has been going on for a long time. I mean, look, I was talking about this stuff in the 90s. Now, obviously, I didn't have a podcast then because podcast hadn't been invented yet. And, I wasn't doing the investor-only business back then. I was in traditional real estate back then. I was working for Remax and then bought my own company and then sold it to Coldwell Banker years later. And I noticed this migration trend out of California way back in the early 90s, okay? And it's only picking up steam. And now this steam will increase dramatically out of high-density areas because guess what? The world has realized that the emperor has no clothes. The emperor has no clothes, and, well, it's many emperors, and all of them are naked. Okay, let's talk about a few of the emperors. Well, number one is the emperor of, I got to live in a big city and I've got to have everything easily accessible because that's where the jobs are. Well, guess what? Now, all those people are working at home, and all those employers have discovered, guess what? We don't need that expensive office space in Los Angeles or San Francisco or Seattle or San Diego or Miami or New York City. That's the place we need at least. We don't need it in Boston or Washington, D.C. or Chicago. In all these downtowns, we don't need that expensive office space. And guess what all the workers have discovered is they're now working from home. They've discovered, gosh, do I really need to be near this densely populated city? Do I need to be paying the high price to live here? Do I need to be paying? Now, guess what? Coincidentally, all of those places, except Miami, have super high taxes. All of them have super high taxes. Well, Miami and Seattle. Those would be the two that don't, because Washington State has no state income tax, even though it's a leftist disaster. Seattle meaning that. And Miami, no state income taxes. In Florida, obviously, right? But, even this would even apply to, say, Dallas, right? So downtown Dallas, downtown Austin, no state income tax there either. And people are realizing that emperor has no clothes. They don't need to live and work near a downtown anymore. Remember when I told you about John Nesbitt, who wrote the book Megatrends, that I discovered John Nesbitt's work in the 80s. That was in the 80s, okay? Boy, I'm dating myself here. Oh well, we're all getting older. And back in the 80s, I just was so fascinated by Megatrends and John Nesbitt's, his, seminal book. I remember him talking about how he was able to live in Telluride, Colorado, in this high quality of life area. And, Telluride, it's a ski resort. It's a quaint, really nice high-end place. He didn't need to work or have his office in a city anymore. And he said he was able to do this because of technology. He was able to essentially work remotely away from the city. He ran a research company that, I don't know how many employees they had or anything, but, I assume he had maybe 30 people working for him. I'll take a guess, doing all sorts of research, and he was writing all his books and, on the speaking circuit, and, he was a bigwig. I'm sure he made big, giant consulting fees and speaking fees. And he had a newsletter I used to subscribe to. I paid $300 a year for it. And Nesbitt said because of technology, he was able to live in the quality of life location, Telluride, Colorado, and he wasn't forced to live in a city, but he could still be completely engaged in business. And he was able to do that because of this technology. You ready? The technology of the day in the 80s, the big technology, was Federal Express. Yep. Fred Smith's company that he got a C- on at Yale for writing, I think, his thesis, or he wrote a paper on it or something. And his professor gave him a C-. He said, FedEx will never work. It's a terrible idea. Listen, never listen to the naysayers, folks. They're usually wrong. Like Zig Ziglar says, nobody ever built a statue after a critic. There is no statue in the world of a critic, okay? Doesn't exist. So, yeah. Anyway, FedEx was the technology, and look at what we have now. We have all these telecommunications technologies that make it all super possible to work remotely. So that emperor has no clothes. The emperor of rip-off, overpriced college educations, that emperor has no clothes. The emperor of the idea of a commute has no clothes. Maybe, and kind of sadly, actually, I'm not saying all this is good, by the way. I'm just saying it's true, okay? And maybe the emperor of the gym has no clothes, and gyms just don't have a future because they're petri dishes for germ. And people are going to want to keep socially distancing as they experience essentially what is a PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder from this, okay? So the article, and then we'll get to our guest, okay? The article says, when state governments ordered residents to stay at home more than a month ago, it triggered a wave of temporary migration. This is just the temporary. Quote, we immediately saw a pickup in our rental market, especially a pickup in our high-end market, unquote, with some renting sight unseen, said Tammy Fellenstein, executive director of Halstead Real Estate in Stamford, Connecticut, close to New York State border. So all those New York people got out of there. Yesterday, you heard the show with the CEO of Douglas Elliman Real Estate, a big, mostly New York real estate firm, as she even talked about, frankly, against her own self-interest. I mean, she was being really candid, I think, with us in the interview. So more power to her, to Dottie Herman on yesterday's episode, talking about how people were migrating out. And she was talking to us from her vacation home in the Hamptons, not in the city. Okay. And then the article goes on to say, some in the Northeast flocked to Florida. Where I am now, Palm Beach, Florida. Beautiful Florida, the place of luxury weather. By the way, folks, it is so gorgeous here. I have to tell you, when I first moved here 2 years ago, I was really wondering if I'd like it because I thought the weather was too hot and muggy and, there were too many bugs. But I don't know. This year, the weather has just been spectacular the last year. I am loving it, loving it, loving it. I need to get outside and take the dog for a walk because what am I doing talking to you? It's beautiful outside. It is just spectacular on the eve of May here. And Florida weather, stunning, spectacular. Okay, so some in the Northeast flocked to Florida. Well, that trend's been going on for a while. It's only going to pick up steam. The article goes on to say, others, and by the way, the pick up steam was my comment. I think you can tell when I'm reading or blabbing, right? Can you tell my blabbing? Because I'm not always telling you when I'm blabbing and elaborating versus when I'm reading. Okay, now I'm reading. It says, others wary of germs easily spreading in high-rise building elevators and through dense city life, rented homes in the suburbs. Did you hear that on Jason Hartman's podcast 2 months ago? Maybe you did. Okay. Still others, particularly young single adults, packed bags and moved back in with their parents. Hey, they don't call it the boomerang generation for nothing, folks. My comment. That was not in the article. And even... I entertain myself, don't I? I'm glad I do because I'm probably not entertaining you. Okay. Moving on. And even for those staying in place, whether in their condo, apartment, or house, the isolation made the walls feel closer. As states plan to reopen their economies, what changes COVID-19 will have on the housing market remain to be seen. Well, some of them don't if you're listening to my podcast because I've already made the predictions and they have a 99.9% rate of accuracy. I'm guessing. That's my estimate of their accuracy. Okay. Demographers and realtors alike predict this is a tipping point for people who've already been dreaming of backyards, private pools, and more space. It will accelerate trends that were already happening, they said, and bring a new level of consideration whether people upgrade their apartments and condos for larger units or move out of dense cities altogether. Sounds a lot like what Jason Hartman's been saying, but, they got to catch up eventually. Anyway, that's it. If you need help, reach out to us. We're here for you. We are your guide. We will help you through these troubled waters and help you prosper, or at the very least, stay afloat. And remember, in comparison, relatively speaking, even staying afloat is getting ahead because the whole rest of the economy is falling behind. So even if you tread water in this environment, you're getting ahead. But I think we can do a lot better than that for you. Reach out to us, 1-800-HARTMAN. Call us 1-800-HARTMAN or jasonhartman.com. And without further ado, let's get to our guest and jump into this 10th episode interview. It's my pleasure to welcome Juanita Ingram. We are going to talk about coronavirus quarantine survival. She's based in Taiwan. She's the host of Where in the World is Juanita Ingram on the Mommy Talk Live network. Juanita, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you on. So we have a large swath of the entire population of planet Earth under some kind of quarantine order, stay at home, at least strong suggestion, if not an actual law or mandate. What's going on in Taiwan? I mean, you're very close to China. Some call this the China virus or the Wuhan virus, right? But there are big differences in terms of the way Taiwan and China have responded to this whole thing, right?
Absolutely. And we are in Taiwan, 84 miles outside of China, yet our numbers are relatively low. As of today, we have 322 cases, only 5 deaths, and that's as of today. And I believe around 200 plus of those cases are imported, meaning just a couple of weeks ago, we were only at 45 cases, and it only went up because the majority of those cases are people that have come here from the U.S., UK, or Europe. So they aren't local, they're imported. And the difference in the way that we responded, as opposed to the rest of the world, really, we handled this or started to handle this back at the end of January. So everything that all of my friends and family are experiencing over in the U.S. right now, we were there almost 30 days ago.
And of course, just to be clear, when you say we, you mean the Taiwanese government.
Right, the country of Taiwan, the Taiwanese government and the residents of Taiwan. So I live here, and we went through, my kids' school shut for 30 days. I didn't leave my house. We were under sort of that strict suggestion of self-quarantine, social distancing. And there's just a big cultural difference here as opposed to what I'm seeing in the U.S. with family and friends. I'm originally from Tennessee. So I've seen a lot of responses, and from my own classmates, from people that I know.
People in Tennessee that are maybe on social media or in touch with you one way or another, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I lived in London for almost 5 years before that. Mm-hmm. And so I have a lens. I was actually just in London March 2nd through the 10th. Sure. Yeah. So I have a lens of 3 continents.
Right,
yes.
Right. Yeah, you have a really interesting perspective. That's fantastic. I just got to ask you, how in the heck did you end up in Taiwan? That's quite a stretch from Tennessee.
It is. Like I said, we lived for almost 5 years in London before this. I'm an attorney, and my husband is the president of the Taiwanese affiliate here for one of the pharmaceutical companies. He works for a pharmaceutical company. So his job is what brought us to London, and now it brought us to Taiwan. And so we are expats, and we are corporate expats. So we live sort of internationally because of his job, although he will say because of the things that I usually end up doing while I'm in various countries, and maybe it's my career and he's just the vehicle that gets us there. Okay. But it's work related.
Yeah. Good stuff. So tell us more. I kind of got you off topic there with my question, but tell us more.
Yeah, no, I think, back in January, it was the end of Chinese New Year, and my kids were out of school. It was around January 25th, towards the end of the year. We were celebrating Chinese New Year. We were actually in Malaysia on vacation, and we heard whispers of what they call the Wuhan virus at that time. Now the coronavirus or COVID-19. And we'd heard whispers about it. I had ordered masks at that time just because we'd heard, there was this sort of SARS-like virus that was coming out of that area. And by the time we got home, my kids' schools were canceled. Everyone was under this heavy suggested self-quarantine. And I think so many people are getting caught up in like the semantics of whether it's a shutdown or a lockdown or quarantine. The bottom line is we all had to sit down. And that was the most important thing. And I think from the lens of being in Asia and being in Taiwan, the culture here, the people here, very compliant. But then again, we had a lot of transparency from the Taiwanese government. I know everyone from CNN to MSNBC to Forbes has written about how Taiwan is sort of the blueprint for handling the coronavirus and the response that the Taiwanese government gave, which I think obviously was brilliant. It kept a lot of people safe. Mind you, Taiwan is a country of 23 million in population. So it's about the size of Texas in population and numbers, but in a very condensed area. So the fact that we only have 322 cases even today is amazing.
Okay. And tell us, you're pleased with the response of your government there, but tell us more about what that means. What did they do? Sure. They acted quickly, it sounds like. That's one thing, right?
Very quickly. And mind you, now they had experience with SARS. So this is, they had a pandemic sort of center in place. They did a lot of temperature checks. Immediately, schools were shut for almost a month. I think it was a little under a month because February is a short month. So then almost the entire month of February, toward the end of January, schools were shut. We had social distancing. There was no movement except for essential travel. So while grocery stores remained open, you couldn't enter without wearing a mask, without having your temperature checked. There were testings that were done and just a lot of communication with the public. They did things to keep from having panic buying. So there were caps that were put on essential things like hand sanitizer, toilet paper. You could only buy 2 at a time just to keep people from panic buying so that there would be enough for everyone. In the early days, in the first couple of weeks, they rationed and took all the masks in the country and rationed them out to those who had residency cards or citizens that were here, and everyone received 2 every 7 days. So if you had a residency card or your passport or your health insurance card, you could get 2 masks every 7 days for everyone in your household. And even now they've switched to sort of an online ordering service where the amount is about 16 cents per mask. And so very affordable. They made sure that everyone had the essentials, again, to control the panic, but they're constantly in communication about where the numbers are, what the nature of the virus is. I received almost like Amber Alerts on my cell phone because I have a Taiwanese number, and everyone that has that, we would receive these text messages where, certain areas were strictly quarantined because there was a case of someone who had been there or who had received a positive test result, and these were the places that they visited. I mean, it was very transparent so that you were equipped to make the right decisions. I think sometimes what I'm seeing in the U.S. with my family and with friends, not just in Tennessee, but everywhere, because I lived in Indiana for almost 17 years before we moved to London and now Taiwan. I think everyone it took a while for people to take it seriously. It took a while for people to believe that social distancing was even necessary, that it was something that was going to work. And I think there's just a lot of unknown about, okay, well, 2 weeks or 30 days from now, what is that going to look like? And I think Taiwan is a perfect example of where that's done, and it is successful. Mind you, our numbers are going to continue to peak and continue to rise as the world continues to deal with it. So we had a hold on everything until it hit the U.S. and hit Europe and hit the U.K., and it was sort of not under control. So for a while, we only had 45, 47 cases. And then we saw the import of hundreds, almost 200 new cases, maybe a little bit more than that, all imported. And so I think for me, I wanted people to know the importance of recognizing that whether you live in the U.S., whether you've never moved, whether you live in your hometown, we're all global citizens. And everything that we do and choose to do impacts everyone all over the world.
That's one of the really, I don't mean for this to sound wrong, but one of the neat things that's come out of this. Because it's a virus, it affects everybody. And the only way we can stop it is to work together. Maybe this is a lesson from our creator that we got to figure out how to work together as a global community. And, this might be a hard lesson for us to learn, right? But it's really, it's just ingrained in the way this kind of thing works, that's what we have to do. And there's no other way.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think that is, like you said, it's a weird takeaway, but if there is a positive to it,
there are many positives, but yeah.
But if there are positives to take away, it is the idea that people can now see that, we have to stray away from the individual mindset to the collective whole. And I think that is something from a cultural perspective that is so different, maybe a little easier and more inherent in Asian cultures as opposed to other cultures. But I do think that it's something that if we're going to survive it and get past it, I was talking to one of my friends that I went to school with, and they were saying, oh, well, I just don't want to stay inside. I've got things to do. I wanted to go to this, and I had plans for spring break. Yeah. And there was,
guess what? That's not just you're affecting. If it were just you,
exactly.
Listen, if nobody's paying for your health care and, and you want to go on a motorcycle with no helmet and hurt or kill yourself, maybe that should be your choice. But when other people have to suffer consequences of your actions, then it's not your choice anymore. Absolutely.
And so when I came out of that sort of 30 days stint, honestly, we were in such a great place. We had no travel bans. It hadn't hit the wave of the UK or US. But as soon as it did, because of choices that people were making and the lack of sort of taking it serious, my children's school went on a second bout. Like right now, they're out of school again. Schools here are shut. We had to do sort of a second wave of trying to make sure that we contain it because, again, we live in a very transient community. People are coming and going from all over the world. And the choices that you make individually, you're right, it's not about you anymore. And I think it was just very hard for people to believe that this was as serious as it is, even though if you just peek your head up and look at what's going on all over the world or in other places in the world, I was posting on Facebook about it, and it was almost as though people were calling me a liar that it wasn't happening because it wasn't in their backyard. It wasn't at their door yet.
Yeah, well, so this kind of thing has exponential potential, so it's
absolutely
a lot different than other issues like the flu, because it's more contagious, and not only more contagious, it's asymptomatic, which means it's stealthy. And even if people do the right thing and self-quarantine, they don't know. That's the problem. It's like a stealth fighter jet. You don't know it's coming. Okay.
Yes, it's a long incubation period, and you can be fine for days and still test positive. I have two friends right now, husband and wife duo in Atlanta, who are doctors, ER doctors, and they both tested positive. The husband is very sick. The wife has zero symptoms.
Yeah, wow.
And only tested because he tested positive. Mind you, they're on the front lines.
Yeah.
It was through, patient exposure. And, it's one of those things where it is affecting everyone so differently. She has zero symptoms. Doubt if she would have ever even gotten tested, but for the fact that her husband had symptoms.
Yeah.
So it's very different, very unique in that regard.
Okay. All right. What else do you want people to know?
Well, I want people to know that self-quarantine, self-distancing, all of these things are to be taken very seriously. I know it's a very hard thing to do. I know it's very challenging. The first time I put a mask on, because it's not in the natural culture of things in the U.S., but the first time I wore a mask and had to go outside, I had a small panic attack because I have asthma, and it made me feel like I couldn't breathe. I live in downtown Taiwan, in Taipei, and it was so still. I mean, you couldn't even hear it. There were no cars on the street. It just seemed like something out of a movie set, and it was fear-inducing. And so I wrote a book recently called Peace Over Panic, and how to find peace in the midst of chaos, in the midst of panic, because I've been through that first 30 days, and I know I was reading all of these posts online, and I understood what people felt like. And I knew that feeling, but I also knew the peace that can come from getting on the other side. There were a lot of scriptures that I read, that I used, that helped bring me to a place of peace. I give a lot of suggestions in there about activities that you can do for self-care, for making sure that you still feel sane while self-quarantine, and then a lot of activities. So it's a 14-day workbook. And each day you get an activity for yourself, for self-care. You get a scripture to help you sort of push away the fear. And then you get an activity to do with the kids, because I am a mom. I have two children. My son's in the 5th grade. My daughter's in the 7th grade. And, when kids are out of school, your routine is sort of thrown up in the air. And sometimes it's very hard to know what can you do with kids on quarantine. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to give those type of tips, also hope and inspiration to people to know that it does work. It is going to take time. Unfortunately, every country will be affected differently because every response in every country is different. But given time, the curve does flatten.
Okay, good. Good to know. Where can they get your book?
Sure. It is available for download at www.IamJuanitaIngram.com. And the donation for the book is actually going to help Dress for Success Greater London and Dress for Success Chattanooga, which are charities that help unemployed women get back into the workplace. We give them interview clothing and interview attire, and it's all for free. So the donation is a win-win. The donation that they give for the book goes to help underprivileged women who will need our services undoubtedly when we all come out on the other side of this.
Okay, Juanita, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.